Hey guys, Brian Stevens here with the National Real Estate Post. I have Barry Sturner from Townstone Financial. He's the CEO over there. And I don't know if you guys saw this story, but he did something that was unfathomable just a couple of years ago. He actually beat the CFPB in a case that was absolutely ridiculous. Now, I said this before, I know enough about this story with these guys that I should have covered it a couple of years ago, and I chose not to because it's the CFPB. But anyways, what we want to do right now is we want to give Barry a wide berth to explain what he did and what he didn't do and how he beat the CFPB. So how are you doing today, Barry?
Doing great. How you doing, Brian?
I'm doing great. So again, just kind of wide berth on this thing. Why don't you start telling your story and then maybe I'll interject.
Well, we kind of had a show like you have, except ours was just once a week. We were more community based. You know, we were local Chicago, on local Chicago radio. It was a Saturday afternoon show, about an hour long, on a weekly conservative radio station. But you know, right. Weekend radio, as we all know, could be anything. It's paid radio. I mean, anybody who turns on AM radio would understand that. You know what's going on. People pay to go on there. So we had the Townstone Financial show going. And we also did podcasts. We would do daily, weekly, all kinds of different podcasts. And obviously, you know, listening to your show for so many years and mine, you can't talk about mortgages the whole time. I mean, people would be bored to death if they were talking about mortgages the entire time. So, you know, invariably, we got into economic things that were going on in our neighborhood, in our community, societal issues that we would talk about. Crime obviously would come up living in a big city like Chicago, and, you know, and politics, obviously. Throughout the years, we talked about politics. One of the misnomers about the Townstone Financial show and what we were doing was we hardly got any leads off our Townstone Financial show. You're talking about a 60-minute show on Saturdays where maybe people were jumping in the car and you were listening to a few minutes. We certainly weren't destination radio, and obviously podcasts, anybody who was doing podcasts. And we're talking about 2016 and 2017. I need to make sure that everybody remembers this is well before all the wokeness and all the craziness and the pandemic and everything. This was still during the time where you could basically say things and people wouldn't get upset with you. We all had opinions and everybody would listen to each other at that particular time. The other factor I think that most people don't understand is we got most of our businesses because we were on the largest Chicagoland AM radio stations, and we were doing 60-second and 30-second commercials. So all day long, when you're listening to AM radio, talk radio, which is really destination radio. Generally speaking, when you go on AM radio, you stick there. You know, if you're on FM, you're basically changing the channels all the time. Right. And doing, and when a commercial comes on, AM radio, you stay on there. So we got most of our business from that. I think the second thing that's very, very important is that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau can't have it both ways. They said two things when they filed against us. They said, one, that we were not doing anything with African Americans. That's number one. And number two, they said that all African Americans heard our podcasts and they heard our radio show, albeit not very many people were listening to that. So you really can't have it both ways, stating that Townstone Financial didn't target African Americans. However, they all heard our statements. So, and that's in the filing.
Wasn't the radio show for the Chicago Bulls?
The radio show, let's talk about the stations that we were on. So The stations that we were on were all the major sports in Chicago, except the Chicago Bears are on a separate station. But we were on sports radio, we were on talk radio, we were on conservative radio. We had the Bears, the Chicago talk about the Bears. Right. We had the Chicago Bulls, we had the Chicago White Sox, we had the Chicago Cubs on there. We had the soccer teams on there. We also had all the college teams are broadcast by the stations that we're on: Northwestern, DePaul, University of Illinois, Northern Illinois University. I mean, we're on the largest stations. Everybody in Chicago. Listen, my mom in Florida can hear WGN. If anybody knows about WGN in Chicago, can hear WGN at night. So it was broadcast all over the place. And let's look at the facts here. The facts state they tried to use racism to cover up what they were trying to do.
Okay,
And
now explain that. Like, explain what you did. The story with the grocery store is such a wild misrepresentation. Can you explain that?
Absolutely, and I think the best thing to do is I will play the video in a second here. But I want to go to the fact that when the CFPB was using redlining and racism against us, obviously embarrassing to all the families at Townstone Financial.
Right.
Anybody that we've ever worked with knows that was untrue. And the fact is, we've never, ever had a complaint against anything we've ever said on the radio. We've been on the radio and we've had that show since 2010. Never a complaint. We've never had an equal credit opportunity complaint. Nobody has ever filed against us with any state that we're licensed with or the Consumer Finance and Protection Bureau. So those are important things. Let's talk about the video. The judge and the filings and everything that I read all the time obviously bothers myself and all the employees, because
right.
to take things out of context that Brian Stevens says and
right.
takes a little snippet and make it to whatever you deem it to be is a problem. We all know that that's going on right now. And these little contexts that were taken out kind of misrepresent everything that we're saying. So let's start with the radio, with the Jungle Jewel comment. There is a jewel, and I want to play this because I think everybody needs to hear this rather than me giving my opinion or yours. You heard it, obviously. All right, so let's talk about this first audio here that you're about to hear. So there is a jewel. It's a grocery store. It's a huge change in the Chicagoland area. In the mid 90s, when I first moved back to Chicago, I lived basically on the south side of Chicago, somewhere called the South Loop. And downtown Chicago was just coming back. And the fact is that we had a grocery desert. I don't know if anybody's lived in a big city. Basically, when the cities come back, there's nowhere to shop. So I was about, 12, 13 miles away. There was no grocery stores anywhere near us on that south part. On the north part, there was one place in an area where many of you might have gone drinking at one time when you were in college, called Division Street. And Division Street and Clark Street is in an area within a half block to a mile of the most wealthy people in the Chicagoland area. It's called Lincoln Park. So I believe this Consumer Finance and Protection Bureau either did not know where this particular grocery store was, or is not familiar with the demographics of the Chicagoland area. Because when I made the statement that this was a scary place and everyone from all around the world went there, what I was saying was, at that particular time, there was a vestibule when you walked through. And if you went to Division Street, we had a lot of street people. And the street people basically lived in that vestibule. And when you walked through there, they were laying there, they were sleeping there. And yes, some of them had drug problems and other things. Some of them looked like they were dead when you were stepping over them. And when you got into this jewel, you couldn't even find a parking spot outside. Many times I would have taken the Red Line train over there. That's how crowded it was, that everybody was going over there from all over the city. Why was it a crazy, scary place? Had nothing to do with color or anything like that. And calling it jungle, from my connotation and most of the people that I know, is when you went there in the middle of winter in Chicago, when it was 50 below, and you got off the train, which was hot and sweaty, and then you went into this jewel, it was another hot and sweaty place. It was packed. Everybody was on top of you. And because it was the only grocery store, and I'm sure many of you go to grocery stores like this, there were things hanging from the ceiling. In the winter, they had lounge chairs and beach stuff in there so that you would buy it for the summer. And every grocery aisle was so narrow because they were trying to stock everything in there. And that's very simply what we were talking about. And this has been taken so out of context because of the fact.
So by the way, 13 miles away from you?
12 to 13, yeah, something like that. It might be a little bit closer because I'm always bad with mileage. Call it in traffic here. Call it took me a half hour to get there. How's that?
I have 10 grocery stores within 1 mile of my house.
All right. Well, but now
No, but I get it.
But you know what I'm saying? In the South Loop in Chicago, when the 2000s roll around, we didn't have a Best Buy, you know, we didn't have a Home Depot, we didn't have a Walmart, we had nothing downtown because it just wasn't done yet. It was downtown Chicago was making a comeback, period. And now there's grocery stores all over the place. In fact, there's 3 in the South Loop right next to each other, which makes no sense whatsoever. But getting to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau so that they could take everything out of context, yes, within about a mile of that particular grocery store, there was a Chicago Housing Authority building. It was called Cabrini Green, and there were problems at Cabrini Green. Everybody knows that place. Yep. But listen, Cabrini Green maybe had 500 residents, 1,000 max in that high rise. I don't know, but this grocery store had thousands of people in there 24 hours a day. So to say that it was all Cabrini Green residents and the people that lived 2 blocks away from there who were living in multi-million-dollar houses, and I living in the South Loop, and people in the West and the North and the North and everywhere else going there, that it was predominantly African-American is just totally untrue. The comment had nothing to do with it.
So you referred to it as a jungle, but my understanding is that's kind of like everybody referred to it as the jungle. And it wasn't a knock at any ethnicity.
Not that I know of. Never knew that.
Right.
Nickname. It was a nickname. Obviously, some people have nicknames and take it and say different things. That was the nickname for 5-10 years. If you go on, because
it was crazy. It was packed.
Because it was crazy. I mean, if you search it on there and you go on Yelp and all the rest, they all have different reasons that they called it there. I have never seen, I can tell you, Brian, I have never seen one person refer to it as jungle on any of these talk things, the blogs, because it was Black, because it was African-American. I've just never seen it. But the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, trying to extend this Equal Credit Opportunity Act, sucked me in, ruined my life for 5 years because and my employees. I mean, some of my employees are still going to counseling here and talking to psychiatrists and stuff like that. It's affected them so much because of the things that were written about them individually that were so untrue.
Categorically untrue.
Categorically untrue. And the fact of the matter is that they're protecting a grocery store on the north side of Chicago. That's the part, if you go through the news stories that are even out there now, even after the judge ruled in our favor, and read some of the stories, they're still basically pretending or insinuating, I'd like to say, that this jewel is on the south side when it couldn't be further from the truth.
I tried to make money in real estate. Don't get me wrong. I've made more money in real estate than I think I've made working anywhere. And that was in my mind. And I started walking and I started looking there. And this was 2 years before I bought my first condo in the South Loop. And I just thought, look, this is a great area. But there were some big problems in the South Loop. Right. The biggest problem was what? Crime? There wasn't a grocery store. You had to go to Jewel, on Division, and it's closed now, or maybe it's reopened on Division and Clark, was the closest grocery store in the South Loop.
Wait, was it Jewel or Dominic's that closed?
Jewel, both of them.
Division. You mean the one way up?
We used to call it Jungle Jewel. That's what they called it, Jungle Jewel.
Why was it Jungle Jewel?
When you went into Jewel, I mean, there were people from all over the world going into that Jewel. It was packed. It was a scary place.
Okay.
I mean,
it had that reputation until RIP. It got knocked down a couple of years ago.
It was crazy in that Jewel, but that's where you had to go. So that was my one big problem.
So let me ask you this: What are you out of pocket on this? Are you comfortable saying that?
I'm not comfortable in saying it, but it's a huge number. It's a huge number. Now the judge ruled with prejudice. Now, when the judge rules with prejudice, he dismissed the case with prejudice. You can go back and try to get money, out of the government. It's very difficult, obviously, to do that. But anytime they rule with prejudice, you can attempt to do that. Obviously.
Are you going to do it? I'm telling you right now, you should.
Listen, all our options are open. I have a great team of lawyers, and I should thank them. Mark Sturbkow, Rich Horn, Sean Burke, and PLF, which is Pacific Legal Foundation. I mean, without them, I couldn't have continued this case. And that's the reason most of the people settle and have settled before.
Right.
By the way, and I think you've talked about this, and I listen to you all the time. you know that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has never taken a fair lending case to court. This was the very first one.
Right.
And why? And I also have to add, because
by the way, that's what I want people to understand what you did.
Yeah.
This is so fundamentally different than everything that's ever happened with the CFPB. They're arguably the largest government agency in the country right now. They're funded by the Federal Reserve, and they have a blank check. They can do whatever they want to do with as much money as they want to do, and they're the only agency who does it. So when they go after big guys out there like the Wells Fargos, the Chases, and all these people who no longer write loans anymore, they want nothing to do with it because they're constantly getting bashed by the CFPB. And what they do is they settle out of court. You're the only company that I know of that's actually taken them to court.
Well, they took us to court. They took us to court. You
didn't settle.
They filed on us. Correct. And here's an interesting thing that I think a lot of people don't know. The current director, is it Chopra?
Yep.
Chopra? Did I say that correct? This came on his plate. A lot of people blame him for this. This had nothing to do with him. When he walked in the door, this was already sitting there. This is actually from the Trump administration, and Director Kraninger. She's the one who green lighted this. I have no idea if the current director, and I hope he sees the ridiculous nature of this thing now. And obviously it was hard for them to get out of at that particular time. But this is from the Trump administration. This was Director Kraninger pushing this through. And it just made no sense. Let's go to the second statement that we're going to play here. And the second one was discussing skydiving.
Out of an airplane.
No way.
That's American
I
beauty.
don't know what dollar amount you'd have to pay me to do that, but
Guys,
I'm not
so
jumping
much
out
fun.
of an airplane.
Everybody should do it. It's so much fun.
Why, have you done it?
Absolutely, I have.
Okay.
It's phenomenal. I recommend that to all of our listeners.
He recommends it to everybody.
Townstone
all his friends.
condones jumping out of airplanes.
Were you
With the
scared?
right equipment.
Were you scared?
I was freaked out.
So why put yourself
Just
in that scenario?
Because you've never felt more alive when everything in your body is telling you, what are you doing? That plane door opens and you just go numb and you look
walk
over
through
the
the
edge.
south side at like 3 a.m. and you can get that same rush.
That's great.
So I'm on the show with a couple millennials who are under 30 years old, Zach and Alec.
Okay.
And they're talking about skydiving. And Brian, you've been talking for how many years now have you had the national show here? How many
17 years.
17 years. I mean, I started in this business in 1998. And I remember when you guys first started, and we used to watch and like, who are those two crazy guys? Anyway, to make a long story short, when you're talking on the radio and you say off the cuff remarks, or you say something that you heard that happened in the community, or you heard or you've seen something heard something on the radio or on TV or something like that, you just spout it out. It has nothing to do with a race or anything else, or you didn't mean to offend anybody. We never meant to offend anybody. Number one, talking about societal issues. But let's be honest here. I live in Chicago. My co-host lives in Chicago. We live in downtown Chicago. For everybody that thinks that our business is some, suburban business in the middle of Lake Forest that's, 50, 60 miles away from downtown Chicago, that could not be further from the truth. Our actual office, if anybody's ever gone to a Chicago Bulls or Blackhawk game, was on the west side of Chicago. We moved in 2004, before that whole area basically turned, where people are living now. Before it was just kind of a meat market. Like if you've ever been to the New York meat market, that's now, a beautiful place. We were right in the heart of Chicago. That particular area, once again, I'm trying to quail the racist theory because it makes no sense whatsoever. We have our office in a predominantly African-American area there on the west side of Chicago.
Did the CFPB look at your HMDA numbers?
The CFPB looked at our HMDA numbers and they compared us to people that we never knew. They never told us who they compared us to. We were a tiny mortgage company, basically doing, I don't know, in a good year, a little over 1,000 loans a year there. But we have a very, very odd model. I mean, you guys talk about your model all the time.
Right.
And our model is that we advertise on the radio and we sat and waited for the phone to ring. Very, very few realtors doing business with directly. very, very few referral sources. I don't know any other way to say that.
Okay.
My partner at the time, David Hochberg, who also had made a statement on here that was taken out of context about, which I don't have it to play, about taking down the Confederate flag they wrote on there was racist. And that was one of the things that they filed on us, got us on the radio, and we basically poured our money into the radio. And here's an interesting thing that we talk about all the time, but I never hear it. I never see it written anywhere. If we didn't want any African-American loans, why are we on AM radio? Why are we're less than 1% of mortgage companies. That includes banks, that includes the mortgage industry, that includes all the non-banks and all the banks advertise on mass media, on the radio. Less than 1%. I mean, think about it. If anybody's listening to this and they go on their radio station today in their local market, there's probably 2 or 3 companies that are on there. Obviously, you got Rocket, Chase, and all the rest, and Bank of America, they're on there. But the smaller guys, there's hardly anybody on there. So these racist individuals have their office in a predominantly Black neighborhood. They live in downtown Chicago. My kids go to Chicago public school. They don't go to private school whatsoever. And we take public transportation all over the place. And so how do you get that? It just doesn't add up.
Yeah.
I'm going to add one more thing that everybody should be aware of. Our emails from almost, I think it was believed 5 to 7 years worth of emails were taken by the Consumer Finance and Protection.
Every one of them.
Every one of them were taken from them. They probably went through them for years looking for something. Do you know what they found?
Nothing.
Nothing. Not one email had any racist joke, any racist commentary, anything like that. Otherwise, with the 12 filings that they filed against us and kept filing different things
Brutal.
And changing different things.
Just brutal.
They would have found something in there. They found nothing. So let's go to that second one there. So we're talking about skydiving, and off the cuff, in a non-offensive, harmless way, Zach said, one of my employees, if I want the same rush as skydiving as you'll listen to, I can walk on the south side at 3 a.m. That's what he said. It's bad all over Chicago right now. You have to, again, go back. This is 2016 and 17 when they're citing these comments. And in 2016, we had a huge spike in crime. And because of where I was living, because I was in the South Side many, many times with my with our baseball team, playing baseball out there and knowing what the residents were going through, it makes no sense to me whatsoever that anybody, unless they were living under a rock, who not only lives in Chicago or anywhere else, didn't know that there was a lot of crime going on at that time in that particular area. But the Consumer Finance and Protection Bureau, for some reason, wants to relegate our First Amendment right to speech. They're not going to do it because I lived in the community and I was going to fight it. I was not going to let my children not be able to speak. I wasn't going to let the people in that area not have their story told. And if they don't want to look at it that way, listen, we were sticking up from the South Side of Chicago because all Chicago people who listen to this know that we don't want you or Washington or anybody else telling us about our city. We can degrade our city. We can talk about how bad something is on the street or something or somewhere else, but you can't because you don't live there. And as a Chicagoan who loves the city, we love our town, and we have 8 mayoral candidates right now vying for mayor. Every time they have a debate right now, the current mayor and all 7 of the other ones vying for mayor, the number one thing that they're talking about is crime.
Right.
Period. And it's all over right now. And unfortunately, at that particular time, when I was talking about it, and that leads me on to my third one, I happened to be, we were advertising with the Chicago Police Magazine, and we had a gentleman on there who was their salesperson on there. I don't recall his name. You'll hear it on there. And we were discussing. At that time I played hockey with a lot of Chicago police officers. I played hockey with some FBI guys. And in 2016, we had this huge spike in the murder rate, unfortunately, that was going on near my house, which is on the south side there. And I was skating with these guys on a Friday, and they happened to talk about something that had happened the previous weekend, and I repeated it. And they used a term that I can't even spell, hoodlums weekend.
Right. In fact, I'm supposed to play today at 1 o'clock, but I'm missing today.
But yeah, surprisingly, today in the paper you didn't see, John Smith got pulled over. It was a pleasant, he got a speeding ticket. The cop was very pleasant with him and wished him well on his way, and that was the end. That's not a news story. That's not interesting.
Being a Chicago policeman, and I obviously have never been one, and hanging out with them sometimes, I mean, that's a rough job. Anything that they do now, is wrong as far as they're concerned, and they don't. What really bothers them is that they don't think they have the backing of the mayor or anybody in City Hall anymore. They don't think that. They think that they all went the other way and ran on them and kind of. They're scapegoating them. Call them scapegoats, and pretty much they're all toothfaces. They're not talking about their people that's running. I don't know who the new police commissioner is, whatever his name is, but. They think that they all ran on them. Obviously, this one case, or there's been numerous cases in Chicago over the last 50 years, the way things worked in Chicago, and people in Chicago know the way things worked here, especially in the police force. But to them, it's always a minority of individuals that do these things. And as they say to me, which you'll really enjoy, there's a minority of mortgage bankers and insurance agents and car salesmen and teachers and all the other things that are bad, but the majority are good. So you can't paint a picture that they're all bad. And as far as they're concerned, there's not enough of them for what's going on in the city. I hear that all the time.
Well, there aren't
enough of them.
Yes, outmanned and outgunned. It's a tough job. I don't think... every day my life's not on the line every day, other than driving or anything a rare accident that could happen to anybody. But these guys. You want to go to the south side of Chicago on a weekend between Friday and Sunday, I think they talk about. And it's like hoodlum weekend. So the Warriors. So the Warriors come out and play?
Yes, the Warriors.
Well, I don't want to go out there then on the weekend and see what's going on.
They're the only ones between that turning into a real war zone and keeping it where it's kind of at. So
I definitely appreciate everything that they do.
We've done a lot of business for police officers. And who's your partner? What's his name?
Dan Rapp.
Dan, for police and firemen since we.
They were talking about like that Clockwork Orange movie and all the rest of the stuff. How that it's the same thing with the word jungle jewel, hoodlums. How that has any connotation or any rhyme or reason in my mind with racism or with African Americans. Listen, there's plenty of white people, Hispanics, and everything, and every other ethnicity committing crimes throughout Chicago and the United States. It's not a problem, unfortunately, of one set of people, but it's a problem for us because we live in Chicago and we don't like it. So going back to the statement, they happen to say that hoodlums weekend and to be careful going there, between Friday and Sunday. I repeated that, and then I added at that particular time that the only thing separating that part of the city from becoming a war zone was the police, because we were talking about the police. Again, when you hear this, you will hear no connotation whatsoever on race, no discussion on race whatsoever. We're talking about crime in the city that we live in.
And 5 years of your emails. 5 years of your emails.
5 years
where
of our
nothing was found.
emails.
You know what I think is kind of getting lost in this whole thing that I think really bothers you is I think when you talk about Chicago, it's coming from a place of consideration where you love your city and you want your city to be better. Like you're not talking about any individual. You're saying I want my city to be better, and sometimes we have to be critical when things aren't going, the right way. We have the same stuff out here in California, Northern California. I mean, we do. But
Philadelphia's got it. I just came back from a hockey tournament in downtown Minneapolis. I was watching the news. I'm all over the place for hockey. St. Louis, downtown St. Louis, beautiful place.
Milwaukee?
Having the same issues. Listen, this isn't a one-person thing.
No, it isn't.
But the Kreninger directed CFPB decided for some reason that they were going to be the Gestapo. They were going to be the Nazis. They were going to be the Chinese communists.
They're going to make an
and
example.
They were going to control. They were going to make an example of me, and they were going to control free speech. And we just can't have it, whether it's our industry or any other industry. We can't have it. We can't allow it. And like you said, an untethered agency such as the Consumer Financial Protection is the judge. The judicial system is why it's there, to make sure that agencies aren't allowed to just do whatever they want to do.
And by the way, just to let everybody know here, the CFPB uses DOJ judges. So the fix is in from the beginning. They're actually picking the judge, not the prosecutor. Of course, they're picking that, but they're also picking the judges half the time. And when you think about that, of course, there's absolutely no way to win, which makes what you did so incredibly extraordinary and frankly brave. I mean, just really brave. I think you've set an example for other mortgage companies to look at, and hopefully
I appreciate it.
No, I mean,
I do. But even on your side, the great Brian Stevens, who will talk about anything, there was fear, and the fear came. And I will give whoever was in Director Kraninger's group there, who decided to turn this case from trying to extend the Equal Credit Opportunity Act from applicants to non-applicants. That was really their goal, to put the connotation on there of racism. And as soon as you brand somebody a racist, no matter who they happen to be, no matter where they happen to live, it doesn't matter. You know, they had that over it, and nobody, I hate to say it, other than the lawyers that I talked about, Pacific Legal, Marks, Rich Horn, Sean Burke, nobody helped me. Nobody wanted to have us on their show. Nobody wanted to talk about it because they were scared, obviously, of that they would be included in this racist case, which is kind of bothersome. You know, it's very, I was reading Forbes yesterday. Okay. I was reading an article getting ready for this. And this is what somebody wrote in Forbes there, who obviously never heard the audio. I sent them to him yesterday anyway. He said, participants on the show sometimes said nasty things about particular neighborhoods of Chicago, areas that often had high crime rates and higher percentages of African-American residents. So you all just heard the audio for yourself. I don't find anything other than factual, societal, community information that we talked about, which was really current events that were occurring. Listen, the fact is, I thankfully, and none of my co-hosts have ever been on the South Side and seen any crime. I've never seen it. I've seen it on the news. I've heard it on the radio. Obviously, I've seen, unfortunately, moms, dads, little kids, brothers and sisters talking about people that were murdered, that were shot.
Yeah.
Breaking my heart when you see a 2-year-old's grandfather on there. And it doesn't happen to be on the South Side. It's all around Chicago now. So we were basically a political show, which they don't want to ever say it's political because then there's a First Amendment right. We were a community-based show talking about societal issues with a little bit of mortgage information in there. We had lawyers on there. We had financial planners. We had credit repair people. I want to get back to the show a little bit because a lot of people, you know, if you listen to what the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau basically said, they took 3 to 5 minutes out of almost 8 years or 7 years worth of shows. So out of thousands and thousands and thousands of podcast minutes and radio minutes, they found 3 to 5 minutes out of that where the comments that you just heard, they deemed the entire show Townstone Financial redliners.
Doing a show for 17 years, what I've always said, as I said, even the Beatles wrote a bad song. Like it's, you know, I mean, if you talk every single day, you can take anybody out of context, anybody. And if you're doing this on a regular basis and you have a bone to pick, you'll find it. Like it's Joanna in my office. She says, if you want to find the bad in people, you will. If you want to find the good in people, you will. But what are you looking for? And a hammer only knows nails. And the CFPB was looking for nails with you. And you guys fought back. It's great. But I'll tell you, the moral of the story is for everybody out there who makes himself public, when you're looking at social media, like what we're doing right now, you guys are probably doing the same thing. You have your Instagram, you have your TikTok, you have your Facebook, you have all these different sites.
Don't forget one other big thing that people don't consider. They wanted all my texts. all my texts. I mean, you're talking about social media, but when you start thinking about all the texts that you've sent from 8 to 10 years ago, just think about that 8 to 10 years ago, what you might have written, who you got mad at, what kind of language you said. The interesting part for me was I checked them all and I was going to be in good shape and I was really, really happy. Can I throw one thing at you that I always forget to talk about?
Absolutely.
And I think this is the icing on the case. So Mark's Sturbkow, Sean Burke and Rich Horn, in order to head this off at the very beginning, we got a CID. Many people out there got one of these civil investigations and answered it. It's about 20 questions. They went to Washington and they were trying to stop this. They were just trying to say, hey, Barry's innocent, small guy, Townstone Financial. They've been doing this forever. Love Chicago, blah, 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 hot dogs, all the rest. And anybody could hate something that they say. Big Chicago Cub fan, right? People on the South Side love the Chicago White Sox. I can't stand the White Sox. I berate them all the time. There could be people on the South Side that didn't want to do launch for me because I'm a huge Cub fan. But they did a survey. They did a test survey, and they did it with a company that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau used to put TRID in. I'm not going to mention the name.
Okay.
Starts with a K. It starts with a K.
Okay.
But this is what the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. You can put it up whenever you like. That they use this. We use the same survey company so that they couldn't say it was bad. And they went out to the South Side of Chicago and they played the snippets that we just, the audio snippets that we just talked about. And I just want to read the comments from the African-American people who participated in this survey. Here's the first one. No participant objected to specific comments. Participants primarily complained that the segments the host provided gave too little mortgage information. Although many found the information interesting, participants also realized that the program offered opinions, not necessarily facts. This is the same things that you guys just listened to here, and this is African Americans answering the questions that they gave them. Participants found some of the host's opinions grounded in social commentary, and they both agreed and disagreed with these opinions. Well, that's a great thing in our country. You get to agree and disagree. Despite these criticisms, participants said they would consider using the host the next time they applied for a mortgage loan. So here's the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, who the Kraninger administration got this stuff and they didn't care. They heard this from actual African Americans and the survey done by this company that they had used. Nearly all participants said they would consider using the host. Nearly all participants said they would encourage family and friends to consider the host, yours truly, the next time they applied for a mortgage.
Wow.
So this is so utterly ridiculous. I will tell you one thing. This survey, if anyone's done a survey test survey, $100,000. I will tell you how much that cost me. I thought it was very important to do it. This is everybody. We didn't have one of them to object. And none of them said they wouldn't use us. And to say that they would recommend us to their family just makes this whole case ridiculous.
Well, I mean, I think one thing that really comes through to me is like you just love Chicago, and Chicago is remarkably diverse. I'm not going to bore you with my story. The first time I went to Chicago to a Cubs game, it was a Giants game over there, and we had a thunder and lightning storm, and it was one of the most amazing things that I've ever gone through. By the way, if you look up Chicago Bomber wants to be famous, there's a picture of me. I'm serious. So what happened is me and Frank, we had our backpacks on, and we were, of course, going around Wrigley, doing everything that you're supposed to do, and it was great. And we stopped in front of a place called Sluggers. Well, the day before...
Used to go to the batting cages at Sluggers.
Yeah. So the day before... the FBI busted a guy who was going to bomb Sluggers because he was mad at his girlfriend.
Really?
Yeah, I'm dead serious. And so me and Frank were walking in front of Sluggers when the Associated Press took a picture of Sluggers for the story. So whenever you see Chicago Bombers, there's a picture of me and Frank.
That's crazy.
What
year are you talking about? 90s?
Oh God, I'm dating myself. I mean, that had to be 15 years ago. It was a long time ago, but it was, listen, if you guys have never been to Chicago,
greatest city in the world.
Go to Wrigley Field.
In the summer.
It's killer. It really is. Is it the elevated K, whatever it is we took in? We took a train in.
L. It's the L. You're close.
Is it the L? All right, it's the L.
Yeah. Elevated train is what we're calling
Yep. It was the elevated L, and it was just such a great time. Chicago's such a beautiful city, and I think it's wonderful that they've got advocates like you who care about the city. And by the way, I'm going to attach any information down below if you guys want to follow up on this. If you're in the mortgage industry, just understand that you're vulnerable just like everybody else, and it's good
Can I say something about the mortgage industry and everyone listening? And
Please
I've
do.
been in the business since 1998.
Okay.
And when these things come up, I'm like all of you listening. It's not me. It doesn't concern me. It's not me. Don't worry about it. Go back, call whoever, and let's get the business done. People, especially in the mortgage industry, as you've spoken many, many times, has a lot of people now in their late 40s, early 50s, 60 years old. Many people have been in this business now 20 or 30 years. It's time for all of you to be concerned with what's going on.
Yep.
Now,
I agree.
I fought this, my lawyers fought this for my kids, for my belief in the First Amendment rights and all the other things. But, we went out and tried to raise some money. We got nothing from the mortgage industry. Nobody really cared about this. Now, all of a sudden that we won, we're the flavor of the year. Everybody wants to come talk to us and this and that, which is great because I'm happy that I fought for everyone. I don't want anyone to send a text tonight and have to worry that someone's going to pull their text. I don't want anyone to have to send an email today and worry that something's going to be taken out of context. I don't want anyone to go on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, or anything else and write something, and somebody in Washington, D.C. one day is going to come back 10 years later and say, look what you wrote there. That's the reason that XYZ happened, and try to put two things together. But as somebody who's never been an advocate, who's someone who's really never been in politics, yes, I give my money here and there. And, on December 30th, I go through all my charities there, and you're giving 100 here and 25 here. And my wife, thank God, works for the American Lung Association, which I much mentioned. So, we have our philanthropic ways, but the industry that you're in, the Matt Ishbas of the world, the Rockets of the world, the guys that have made Loan Depot that went public, that made billions of dollars here. Nobody gave me a penny. All the people that say that they're advocates for you and what's going on in this industry.
By the way, I'm not putting names out there either, but I had this conversation years ago with your story. And by the way, just again, everybody understand this. I was given all the information and I knew that these guys were in the right, and I didn't do it. And I was told from somebody who's a lot smarter than me to walk away from it. I was told that.
Everybody was told that, and I understood it. I was told to settle. I was told to give in. You didn't do anything wrong. We understand, but it's going to cost you blah, 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 blah. Well, without Mark Serbka, can't pronounce his name. Mark's hardly charging me any money, and my other lawyers. And then this Pacific Legal Foundation, Steve Simpson came in on his white horse. I mean, most people can't fight them. They're a non-for-profit Pacific Legal Foundation. You can go PLF. I think it's plf.org. I mean, those are the guys that protected your industry. Everyone who listens to Brian here, they protected our industry. Give some money to them, Pacific Legal Foundation. They went in there and made sure that you can go out and send an email today. You can send a text today and don't have to be in fear.
I want everyone to know, like, the idea of this show is I wanted to give a wide berth because of how I dealt with this story years ago. I've known about it for years. And you're right. Now that you you're kind of the cute girl right now, but I hope everybody understands that this affects everybody. This is not a us two. This could be anybody with social media right now. And when you have overzealous prosecutors with unlimited budgets, this could happen to anybody. So use this as a word of caution, and just understand that you've got Barry over here who he took a punch for all of us, and he did something that is absolutely undeniably never been done. Not by the big companies, not by the Chases, not by the Wells, not by the B of A's. He actually won. And that's a good thing for all of us. Sanity, a moment of sanity in a crazy world.
I'm hoping Director Chopra stands by his word. And his word has been lately, as you know, they're going after the big guys, and they're not going to waste time with these little companies like us. And this was on his plate, and he continues to go after the big guys. I'm hoping he walks the talk, talks the walk, whatever like that, and sees the ridiculous nature of this. That's my hope.
It is, and again, I just think what's lost in this, and we can stop here, but this is an industry-wide thing that could affect anybody in any city anywhere. With that said, Brady, I just really appreciate your time.